Indulgences, as Catholics know them today, did not exist for the first 1,000 years of church history. According to Cardinal Maximus IV, the theological arguments that try to justify the late introduction of indulgences into the West constitute, in our opinion, a collection of deductions in which every conclusion goes beyond the evidence. Judaism and Christianity have always taught that almsgiving is efficacious for salvation. Additionally, it was believed that giving alms can assist prayers on behalf of others. Early Christians applied the preceding to the living and the dead. Further, not only were alms able to serve this function, but also the Eucharist and good works generally. Early church indulgences had nothing in common with the preceding. Rather, an indulgence was when a bishop would indulge the request of a martyr who vouched for someone guilty of sin, such as apostasy. Why was this necessary? Due to confession being a public act performed in front of the congregation directed towards a priest or bishop, the priest or bishop had real-world knowledge pertaining to the contrition of the penitent. A literal letter of recommendation from a martyr assisted the bishop in properly evaluating whether someone could commune worthily, avoiding the sort of harm that unworthy communing causes. Not surprisingly, the early church even had a canon regulating letters of recommendation used to acquire an indulgence. Abuses surrounded these letters. Cyprian demanded that the letters not be blanket statements but name specific individuals the martyr actually knew. He spoke derisively of those who believed that the merits of the martyrs and the works of the righteous can simply be transferred to people's accounts. The Lord alone can have mercy. Man cannot be greater than God, nor can a servant remit or forgo by his indulgence what has been committed by a greater crime against the Lord, lest to the person lapse this be moreover added to his sin. But if anyone, by an over-hurried haste, rashly thinks he can give remission of sins to all, or dares to rescind the Lord's precepts, not only does it in no respect advantage the lapse, but it does them harm. Cyprian's comment makes sense if one presumes that the point of the letter of recommendation was to assist the bishop in discerning how repentant and thereby ready to commune someone was. This is why he admonished African bishops. Even although they might have received certificates from the martyrs, I ordered altogether the apostate's restoration to communion to be put off, and to be reserved till I should be present. With the end of the systematic persecution of Christians, letters of recommendation and indulgences disappeared. Nevertheless, priests and bishops still requested visible forms of penance to prove that penitents were genuinely contrite. What would be better than to put one's money where his mouth is and give alms, which were recognized as salvific? In the medieval West, the payment of fixed sums of money depending on the sin became fashionable. Absolution was mainly given for pilgrimages, which at least plausibly demonstrated contrition. Abbots and bishops at these pilgrimage sites, who not coincidentally profited from these pilgrims, began bypassing the penances of a pilgrim's local bishop and granting absolution directly. Everyone got in on the business, including popes, bishops, and abbots, and these absolutions began to be given to the dead. By the 11th century, this monetized system of bypassing penances, whether on earth or after death, something called purgatory, became known as indulgences. Even giving money for something as trivial as bridge construction can purchase an indulgence. After all, building a bridge, a good work of sorts, can be understood as proof of contrition. As taught by the Catholic Catechism, an indulgence is a remission before God of the temporal punishment due to sins, which the faithful Christian who is duly disposed, that is, actually repentant, gains under certain prescribed conditions through the action of the Church, which, as the minister of redemption, dispenses and applies with authority the treasury of the satisfactions of Christ and the saints. An indulgence is partial or plenary according as it removes either part or all of the temporal punishment due to sin. The faithful can gain indulgences for themselves or apply them to the dead. These indulgences work due to God's and the communion of the saints' good works and prayers that make up the Church's treasury. The Catholic Church, by virtue of the power of binding and loosing, opens the treasury of merits of Christ and the saints to obtain remission of the temporal punishments due to the penitent's sins. In other words, the Catholic Church can decide literally how many or how few merits of the saints and God to apply in order to purge the unrepentant sins of the living or dead person receiving the indulgence. This radically inverts early church practices. The differences can be summarized as follows. In the early church, almsgiving, good works, prayers, and the Eucharist help both the giver and the not very bad after death, the latter being able to attain a full remission of sins sooner. In Roman Catholicism, indulgences help both the giver and the not very bad in purgatory after death, both being able to attain either a partial or a full remission of temporal punishment. In the early church, alms, prayers, good works, and the Eucharist are performed by both laity and the clergy. In Roman Catholicism, indulgences are performed only by bishops with the Pope's permission through the exercise of the keys, that is, the Pope's sole discretion. In the early church, the degree to which alms, prayers, good works, and the Eucharist help is mysterious. In Roman Catholicism, the degree to which indulgences help is either partial or plenary, that is, complete, solely at the discretion of the bishop or pope. In the early church, certificates from confessors and receiving clergy vouched for a living individual to sway a bishop to lessen or remove a penance. In Roman Catholicism, indulgences are granted by bishops or the pope, not acting as letters of recommendation, but rather enacting a transfer of merits from the church's treasury. In the early church, the degree to which certificates help is up to the discretion of receiving clergymen in accepting their recommendation and determining the petitioner's intent. In Roman Catholicism, indulgences are solely at the discretion of the bishop or pope without regard to whether the saints would vouch for the individual and simply assumes good intent from the recipient. In the early church, blanket letters of reference were condemned. In Roman Catholicism, the saint's approval is assumed. Cardinal Newman admits, indulgences in works or in periods of penance had a different meaning according to historical circumstances. Like any commodity, indulgences were consolidated into an oligopoly, cutting out abbots and local priests. Even bishops lost out on the best indulgences, the plenary ones which grant unlimited time out of purgatory belonging solely to the Pope. According to Schaffern, papal allies of the 13th and 14th centuries accepted indulgences for the dead because they extended the jurisdiction of the Church and, more importantly, of him who reigned over the Church. Opponents of indulgences for the dead generally belong to an ecclesiastical faction often at odds with the papacy. Since the 16th century, the Catholic Church has reformed indulgences so that they are not a revenue stream, but the inherent theology behind how they work remains the same.